Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is Technique Tuesday. In this week's Technique Tuesday, I'm going to demonstrate how to knit a top-down hat without a pattern. So let's get started. Here's what you need in order to knit this hat. You need the yarn of your choice. I'm using this one right here. You need a needle size that gives you the appropriate gauge for this yarn that you're using. If you don't know what gauge is appropriate for the yarn, you can check the ball band. There will also be a recommended needle size on the ball band as well. That is a guideline for getting that gauge. May not be exactly what you need, but it's a guideline, and we'll talk more about that later. The skills that you need for this top-down hat are, the most important one is the ability to knit small circumference items in the round. And I'm talking very small because we're starting at the crown of the hat with 8 stitches, so it's very small. A 9-inch circular needle is not going to work. You can use double-pointed needles. You can use 4 or 5, whichever is your preference. Or you could use flexi flips if you like those. I like using a 32-inch circular needle for just about everything, and so when I'm knitting a small circumference item with a needle like this, I'm using the magic loop technique. If you like the 2 circulars method of knitting small circumferences in the round, you can do that, whatever is your preference. If you do not know any of these techniques, I have videos on them, which I will link to down in the video description. You can try them out, see which one you like, and then once you understand how to do that, you'll be ready to knit your top-down hat. The only other skills you need is a basic long tail cast on and a standard bind off. We're not doing anything fancy with this hat. The next thing you need are 2 measurements for the recipient of the hat. So if they are near you, and you can measure them, that's great. You're going to measure around their head, right above their ears. You're not measuring over the top of their ears, you're measuring above their ears. And then you are going to measure, assuming that they want their hat to come down to the bottom of their ears, you're going to measure over their head and down to the bottom of the other ear. Here. If the person doesn't live near you, so you can't measure them, I do have a video that explains how to measure a head for a hat, and I will leave a link down below, and you can send that link to them. So you do need to know how big to make this hat. The next thing we want to do is to calculate the number of stitches that we need for this hat. So typically what we want to do is knit the hat 10 to 15% smaller than the actual circumference of their head. So I want to knit a hat for a baby that has an 18-inch head. A hat that was 15% smaller is 18 times 0.85 because that's 85% of 18, and that is 15.3 inches. If I did 10% smaller, I'd multiply by 0.9 because that would be 90% of 18, and that is 16.2. So I want something that's between these 2 measurements. My gauge that I'm aiming at based on the yarn that I'm using is 5 stitches per inch. So I multiply this measurement by the 5 stitches per inch because it's 15.3 inches, so every inch I want to have 5 stitches. So that ends up being 76.5, and this is 81. I'm going to choose 80 stitches. This is going to work out really well for this hat. This hat starts with 8 stitches and it increases by 8 every time. So it'll be very easy to just incrementally get up there to 80. But let's say I had chosen 76 stitches instead. Then as I increase up to 64, and then I get to 72, rather than increasing by 8 stitches on the last round, I would just increase by 4 stitches on the last increase round and get myself up to 76. So if you end up with a multiple of 8 for your hat, that works out perfectly, but if you need a few stitches more or a few stitches less, you can accommodate that in that last round of increase. And I will explain better as we get to that point. So I'm going to use this yarn here. This is a worsted weight yarn, and I can look on the label and I can see that the gauge recommendation is 18 to 20 stitches over 4 inches or 10 centimeters. And then the recommended needle for that is a US size 7 to 8, which is a 4.5 to 5 millimeter needle. Now I know that I'm a slightly loose knitter, and I do want to get about 5 stitches per inch with this yarn. I need a US size 6 needle, which is a 4 millimeter needle, to get 20 stitches per inch. So I'm actually going to use a long tail cast on. This will work perfectly well. So I don't need to measure out very long of a tail because I'm only casting on 8 stitches. I put the tail over my thumb. I don't need to start with a slip knot. I'm going to dive down and just create a twisted loop. And that's my first cast on stitch. And then I do 7 more cast on stitches to get my 8. Okay, so now I'm going to join in the round, and because I'm using a long circular needle and I'm using the magic loop technique, I'm going to slide the stitches on the cable. So I'm actually going to divide them not exactly in half. I'm going to divide them so that I have 3 stitches on one needle and then 5 stitches on the front. You don't have to do things the way I'm doing them. Everybody has a choice, but you can. In order to join this in the round, I'm going to work this first stitch. Remember, that's just a twisted loop. It isn't like the other cast on stitches. So I'm going to work that stitch, and now I'm going to let it slide to the back needle. So that is now my last cast on stitch. And so now I'm starting at the beginning of the round. So depending on how you are working, you could put a marker on your needle, or you could put a marker in the edge instead. I'm just going to put a marker right here to let me know where the beginning of the round is. If you are using a different cast on this, if you're using a pinhole cast on, if you're using Judy's Magic cast on or Turkish cast on, one of those, work a round of stockinette first. But if you are working with the long tail cast on, you don't need to work a plain round first. So if you're using one of those other cast ons and now you have your plain round, now everybody's going to be doing the same thing. We're going to knit a stitch, and then we're going to do a yarn over. So I'm holding the yarn in my left hand, so a yarn over is like this. I just bring my needle behind there like that, and then I can work another stitch. If you are holding the yarn in the right hand, you're going to bring it between the needles to the front and then back over to the back in order to work your next stitches. But don't be confused by the fact that I'm holding my yarn in my left hand. Do a yarn over the way that you do a yarn over with your knitting method. So we're going to alternate a knit stitch with a yarn over all the way around it. I'm going to end this with a yarn over. That, if you have this at the end of a needle, it can sometimes feel like it's going to fall off. You can always get it back on if you need to. Okay, so my yarn over fell off, so I can just bring it over, come around from the back, and now I can work across these 4 stitches the same way. So I'm going to knit one, I'm going to do a yarn over, knit one all the way across. And again, if you have a yarn over at the end of the needle and it's going to keep sliding off, don't even worry about it. Get yourself ready on your next needle, then bring that yarn around the back and over the top so that you have your yarn over. All right, for the next round, we are going to knit the knit stitches. And then when we get to a yarn over, we're going to work this yarn over so that it twists. If we worked it through the front like we'd normally do with a yarn over, we'd have an eyelet. We don't want an eyelet. We want this to be like a make one increase so that it will be twisted. So we're going to go through the back of this yarn over in order to knit it, and that is going to twist it at the base. So we're going to do this all the way across for the entire round. Remember that yarn over should be at the end. You're going to work that through the back. Again, through the back. So now I have completed the round after an increase. So I'm going to alternate between increase rounds and then plain rounds where I'm working the yarn overs through the back. For the second round, I'm going to work both of the two stitches. We're going to the original knit stitch and the one that has the twisted loop right below it. That was the yarn over that we closed up. We're going to work both of those stitches. So we're going to do knit 2 and then a yarn over. So we're going to do the same thing all the way around. Knit 2, yarn over, knit 2, yarn over, knit 2, and then you can, if you have a yarn over at the end of the needle, you can skip that until you're ready to start the next needle, and then bring that up around from the back and over to make sure that you've created it. Again, knit 2 on the second half, yarn over, knit 2, yarn over, yarn over. So I'm going to show you what happens if you lose that yarn over at the end of the needle. I'm going to work this next round without having that yarn over there and show you what to do. Okay, so I'm getting to the end of this round. I don't have my yarn over there. What I can do is I look for that strand that's connecting this stitch to here. I lift it up. So now I've got that missing yarn over on my needle, and I work it through the back. So this is just a regular make one increase instead of a make one increase that takes 2 rounds. So you can always fix that if you discover that you have forgotten your yarn over. So you're just going to continue doing this. You're going to be alternating an increase round where you're doing yarn overs with a plain round where you're working those yarn overs through the back loop until you get close to the number of stitches that you believe that you need for this hat based on your gauge. So I'm looking for, some space between my stitches, maybe around the same amount of space as the yarn is thick in order to measure the stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm measuring across here and I'm seeing just about exactly 5 stitches. So my gauge appears to be correct. So let's say you're in the situation where your final round needs to be something other than 8 increases. It needs to be a smaller amount, 2 or 4 or 6, whatever it needs to be. So if we look at the 8 sections that we have, as we are looking at our 8 increases, if we only needed to do 4, we could eliminate say the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th, so that the only time we're going to just knit across until we get to that end of that second section and then do a yarn over. knit across 2 more sections, do a yarn over like this. You want to space these increases evenly. You don't want to put them all in the same half of the round. You want them to be spaced out. So if you, for some reason, needed to add 3, you just space them out approximately so that they're spread out and they're just not all bunched together. So this is the point. I have my 80 stitches on the needles right now. I have the correct gauge. So now I'm just going to work in the round until I want to start the ribbing. So I have quite a few choices for what kind of ribbing I can do with 80 stitches. I could do knit 1, purl 1, because that would, you know, it's a multiple of 2 and that goes evenly into 80. I could do knit 2, purl 2, because that's 4 stitches and that goes into 80 evenly. I could do knit 3, purl 2. That's a multiple of 5 and that would go in to 80 evenly. But let's say I wanted to do something. Let's say I just decided at the last minute, I've got my 80 stitches and I'm like, well, I think I'd really like knit 2, purl 1. Well, that's a multiple of 3. And that does not go evenly into 80. I would either need 78 stitches or I would need 81 stitches. So as I'm working my first round of ribbing, I would do knit 2, purl 1, knit 2, purl 1, you know, round. And somewhere in this half of the round, I would do a knit 2 together, knit 1, purl 1. And so that would reduce one of the stitches in the first half. And I would do the same thing at some point in the second half. And that would bring me down to 78. But there's an alternative, which is to increase by 1 stitch so that I have 81. And that's what I'm going to do in this case. It's going to keep the stitch count closer to what I already have. But also, I think this is a really invisible way of adding an increase when you are switching to ribbing. Now, I can use this technique at any point in the round, but I'll do it at the beginning so you don't have to wait for the end. So I can do a knit 2, purl 1, go along, and at some point, if I want to add my stitch, I'm going to add it when I'm working the second knit stitch. So I've knit 1, and now I'm going to do a knit through the front and then the back. And that's going to increase my stitch, and the resulting stitch is going to look like a purl stitch. So I don't need to do a purl now. So I've got my knit 2, purl 1 now. I've got my extra stitch, and now I can just do knit 2, purl 1 for the rest of the round. After finishing the ribbing, I did a standard bind off. I want to show you 2 things here. One is that I ran out of the pink yarn. As I was binding off, it was switching to that kind of blue color instead. Because this is a self-striping yarn, I had some pink on the outside, so I just cut the yarn and joined a new strand so that I could continue binding off there. And at the end, after I have the last stitch off the needle, then I can just join that end of round to beginning of round and avoid a jog by creating a chain that joins the 2 together. And I have a video on this. I'll put all these kinds of videos down in the video description, how to do a jogless bind off, how to join a new strand in the yarn. That's demonstrated with a different bind off, but it's the same concept. You can just add a new strand of yarn and then weave that in later. Now at the top, remember we did a long tail cast on, and just like we joined the end of the round to the beginning of the round for the bind off, we're going to do that for this before we fasten everything off. So we're going to snug that up a little bit. That's the first cast on, and we want this to go to the left. We're going to catch these 2 strands right here. They're coming above the tail. I'm going to pull like this. And now I've joined them together. So that's smoother. But now I'm going to take the tail, I'm going to go through all of those twisted loops all the way around. Pull the needle through. Pull the needle through. And when I come around, back around to the beginning, I will have run this tail through everything. So now I can cinch it up tightly like that, and that will close. Then I poke that down through the center. And then that's closed at the very top. So at this point, the only thing left to do is weave in my yarn tails and give this a nice soak in some warm water to relax the fibers and even out all of the stitches. This was a demonstration of the most basic top-down hat that you could knit. Let me know if you have any questions or suggestions for how to modify this sort of hat for different types of crown increases or other scenarios that you might imagine. Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.